minister, Nobrega, has been brought up on corruption charges for some real estate deals that were done while he was the finance minister, which were very questionable. I don't know whether you knew about these ones. But anyway, it's one of the first real examples of a top Chavez who is being charged with corruption. And I think that's a very good sign. Okay, so that's another obstacle. Another is a new Chavez oligarchy emerging. That many of the leading Chavez are themselves engaged in capitalist enterprises. In some cases, they do this through frontmen. That they're not, they're silent partners. There are other, are known capitalists who are doing this, but we know who the partners are. And so that's another problem. And then there's also the belief, among many, that, look, we can't go to socialism. We have to depend on capitalism for a long period of time. Therefore, we have to make some concessions to capital, and we have to, and that's important. And you get that, argument being made, by among many, strong Chavez who are saying, well, let's be realistic. We need to walk on two legs, and one of those legs has to be the domestic capitalists who supply, inputs for, say, the state sectors, et cetera, like that. And this is something, I was going to read a section of the talk, the paper from the July-August thing, because I take up that question, but I propose that, in fact, by doing that, they're not walking on two legs. In fact, they've got one leg moving backwards. In any event, that's another thing. Another obstacle is very clear statist tendencies within the government. There is a very strong top-down orientation on the part of some ministers, especially in what they call the strategic sectors, which is to say oil, energy, power, etc. And their orientation is a very hierarchical structure in which basically workers take orders from above and have very little say. They have, particularly in the case of the oil industry, many of the grassroots movements that emerge in the context of the struggle against the bosses' lockout. There was something called the guide committees, have effectively been dismantled as a result of pressure and from above. And the problem there is that there is that tendency which is leads workers to say, in these cases, if we can't make decisions in the workplace, if we can't do the things that the revolution says we're doing, well, we'll do what we can do, what we're used to doing, demand higher wages. Which is a particularly problematic situation when you have a working class which is overwhelmingly in the informal sector and very poor, and you have a very small organized working class outside the public sector, which is receiving significant rents and also is making higher demands. And in some cases, some of the most militant-sounding left groups who are saying we have to demand higher wages, et cetera, like that, are in fact basically defending a very minuscule aristocracy of labor within the country. So that's a problem. But, and here the problem is that when you have the statist tendency, you need, a strong organized working class to struggle against that in those state sectors, in the energy sector, in the oil sector, et cetera. But in fact, those, trade unions in those sectors are not. They're busy fighting each other. There's been enormous splits among the Chavez unionists in the organization UNITE, which has a ironic name, and they're constantly engaged in battle. It completely, I'd say, obliterated a coherent organized working class movement for the present. Now the only thing that many of the trade unionists seem to be unified on is hatred of the new Minister of Labor, who comes from one of the smaller factions in the organized trade union movement and who has been acting in various ways to support his own faction. But all of these things that I've described, the obstacles, were all there before. I mean, they're not new. I mean, there's nothing new here. And yet it moves. It moves forward. And that's the most important thing to recognize, that the revolution is advancing despite all these problems. And it advances because of the unique dialectic of leadership and masses. A leadership which is, unlike social democrats and many people who don't call themselves social democrats, is always prepared to move in rather than give in when capital attacks, and masses who are demanding that it go further. And that process of interaction between Chavez and the masses of people, which he's referring to because he's a reader of Negri, among other things, the multitude, that interaction is very important because Chavez cannot and will not, because of where he is coming from, will not easily disappoint these demands from below. He's constantly recognizes it. He comes alive when he's in contact with the poor, with masses, etc. So that's what drives the process forward, but there's nothing inevitable about whether it will succeed. And it depends on whether it can continue to advance beyond these obstacles. So, what's Venezuela all about then? What's happening in Venezuela? I think, I haven't said anything real about oil revenues. Oil, is there. It's been very important in dealing with the social debt, that's existed. Extremely important, but it's also been responsible for that cultural clientelism, rent-seeking, and corruption. But what makes what's happening in Venezuela important has little to do with oil. What makes it important is its focus on human development and revolutionary practice. When you look at the nature of the programs they introduce that put human beings first, the programs in health, the programs in education, the programs in revolutionary democracy, because that's what the communal councils are all about, the idea of transparency, the idea of education in the workplaces, and all these kinds of things. These are elements that you don't hear about outside Venezuela. You don't hear about them in the capitalist press. But they are elements which are absolutely essential to communicate outside Venezuela, to communicate everywhere, to communicate in Canada. Because one of the things I think is important is, communicating this is an important aspect of solidarity work. Building support for Venezuela, for the experiments that Venezuela is engaged in, is extremely important for that purpose. But I think it's not simply that. It's also a question of the process of communicating what's happening in Venezuela, the communal councils, the processes of education, health, etc., the emphasis on worker management. I haven't said enough about that, but we can come back to that. Is also a process of struggling here. And it's a process of struggling here to defeat that perverse logic of capital, and to defeat it everywhere. So I think if you talk to people about, don't you think governing should occur in units of 200 to 400 families? Would you see anything wrong with that? Wouldn't you like to be doing that kind of thing? Don't you think that education should be, take this form, these kinds of things? Don't you think that that state money should go to dealing with serious problems of people? Incident, the hotel I'm in, apparently is just now filled with people from Ecuador, and other countries for Mission Milagro, where they're doing having eye operations for people who have been blind and ignored because they're poor, etc. Don't you think these kinds of things are important? I mean, to communicate that, I think that there's an absolute identity between building solidarity work for Venezuela and building a struggle for socialism here. And I think it's essential, to build that movement here and everywhere for socialism for the 21st century. So build it now.
Thank you for all that energy after the flight, the midnight flight. We've got to keep your adrenaline going for another hour. So the floor is open for different questions from people, and also Daniela, who knows a great deal about the Missionis, in particular the healthcare sector, so you can also ask questions towards her as well. So let's open the discussion. Daryl?
Yes, Michael. You commented recently on the draft Bolivian constitution and how it doesn't have the subversive element of human development in it. And I'm wondering if you can give us some more information as to how that got in to the Venezuelan constitution, because it is incredibly remarkable. And the fact that it's there, I think I can just sort of guessing that it means it wasn't just simply a bright idea from one person. There has to be some social roots, but I know nothing about it, and I'm wondering if you can give us some information.
You should maybe take a few so you can catch your breath, and we'll try to get many sisters contributing as well. So, Suzanne?
Thank you very much for this very illuminating talk and inspiring as well. I have two questions. First of all, I'd like to know